So welcome now to Federica Frabetti from Oxford Brookes University.
Okay. All right. So I want to start by thanking Jaime del Val and Reverso for organizing this project and conference, and I'm very honored to be on the advisory board. Can anyone hear me? No? Shall I hold this, maybe? Is this working? No. Is this working? Yes. Okay. No, I was just saying I wanted to thank Jaime for organizing this project and this conference. Okay, when I was writing my paper for this kickoff event, I asked myself how I would respond to the title of this conference, Multiplicities in Motion, Affects, Embodiment, and the Reversal of Cybernetics, which to a certain extent was also the same as asking what I would be able to contribute to this project. And there are two main points I want to concentrate on in my contribution. Sorry. Okay. Which come from the conference program, but are also the points of connection between my research on software and the digital and Metabody. And the first one is the concept of the transductive and the idea of the technogenesis of the human, or the potentially always already post-human or meta-human. And I will say something on this in a moment. And the second point is the significance of software and software studies for our understanding of the technogenesis of the post-trans meta-human and the contemporary effects of this on affects and embodiment. So let me start from an examination of the first point, and then I will say how it relates to the study of software, and why I think studying software is an essential part of studying the Metabody, and then I will offer some suggestions. So the prefix meta we have used in the programmatic text of Metabody. Meta understood, and I'm quoting from the program, as mutation, change, in between, movement across, incipient, exceeding, embracing. The prefix meta opens up a space in which I hope my reflection can frame itself and reach out in some kind of transductive relation to the others, which relates directly to the other question. If we are aiming at having, and I quote again from the program, a metadisciplinary field of movements that do not attempt to define a new stable regime of knowledge, then my question would be, what would such knowledge look like? How do we keep knowledge open? And open to what? Since perhaps all knowledge tends to close down at some point and to police its own boundaries, how do we make sure we are continually challenging this tendency to closure? So in order to answer these questions, all the above senses of meta need to be explored. And as I said, I'm particularly interested in the concept of the transductive. Now, the concept of the transductive was developed by Gilbert Simondon, and it expresses the non-pre-existence of the terms of a relationship to each other. And I will come back to this in a moment. What I want to suggest here is that the transductive offer an important foundation for our understanding of contemporary technologies and on the kind of technicized forms of life we have become. Also, the transductive might offer the possibility of instituting a conversation between different conceptual frameworks brought to this project by different participants, because we all come from different conceptual frameworks. And it might help to constitute a methodology of some sort. Okay, so let me spend a few words on the transductive and the technogenesis of the human. The idea that human genesis is always already technogenesis belongs to what has been called the philosophical tradition of originary technicity, which Richard Beardsworth calls the originary technicity, and Bernard Stiegler calls the originary prostheticity of the human. So it's a tradition that begins with Heidegger and then encompasses thinkers such as André Leroi-Gourhan, Jacques Derrida, Gilbert Simondon. And this tradition sees technology not merely as an instrument, not merely as a tool, but as constitutive of the human. So the thinkers of originary technicity oppose the philosophical conception of technology as a mere instrument, a mere tool, which is based on the Aristotelian thought. Okay, so within the Aristotelian framework, philosophy has always opposed knowledge to technology. Technology is just a tool, is something that hasn't got an end in itself, but that we use towards an end. And this tradition deprives technology of every knowledge value. On the contrary, thinkers of originary technicity suggest that the human has always been technological. Okay, the human has always been technological. It emerges with technology. So, for instance, Stigler draws on the work of Leroi-Gourhan to argue that the human co-emerges with tool use. Moreover, technology carries the trace of past events. So, for instance, a carved stone used as a knife preserves the act of cutting. It's the memory of the act of cutting. So it becomes a support for memory. To use Mark Hansen's words, technology is the support for the inscription of memory. And it is only through memory, therefore through technology, that human beings gain access to their own past and therefore become aware of themselves or gain a consciousness. So in this sense, technology is the condition of the constitution of our relation to the past. And technology also makes others' experiences available. So take cinema. Cinema is the emblematic technology of contemporaneity. Cinema makes available to us the experiences of others. So for these kind of thinkers, we as human beings exteriorize our memory into technological objects. And also humans evolve through technology. So we don't evolve just through genetic memory, which is inscribed in our genes. We don't just evolve through epigenetic memory, which is the memory, which is what is learned through lived experience, but we also evolve through what has been called epiphylogenetic memory. So what is experienced by other human beings that we then learn through technology. And from this point of view, of course, language is a technology, is shared memory that we learn. Writing is a technology. Software is a technology. Only we must remember that these technologies are non-instrumental. They are not mere tools. They are foundational for our sense of time and our sense of who we are. So, of course, humanity has always evolved through epiphylogenesis. We have always been technological at heart. And this is why, according to Simondon and to Stigler, the relationship between technology and the human, they call it the relation between the who and the what, is always transductive. Okay, so it is a relationship whose terms do not pre-exist each other. Humanity and technology are indissociable, and one cannot exist without the other. Okay, so if we think using this tradition, the human has always already been artificial. The human is only produced through epiphylogenetic memory, which is always already non-human, because it is a prosthesis. And since the logic of technology is never fully anthropological, okay, it is never just human, so there is always an unstable equilibrium and a tension which is irresolvable between the two terms, between me and my technologies. I need them to be human, but they are not human. So I exist as a human in the interaction with, originary interaction within technology. And technology brings forth a certain disorientation in society. This is what Simondon argues. in which society needs to respond to technology through readjustment and reorientation of the world. So we need to look at the transductive relation between the social and the technological in its historical specificity. So for instance, historically, alphabetization, so the emergence of alphabetical writing, led to the possibility of inscribing the law, and therefore of examining the law critically. And such practices of reading and writing shared by a group of people, the capacity of making judgments, of making decisions, in turn became the foundation of the polis, the Greek polis. So we are talking about changes which happened in the Mediterranean world centuries ago. So politics was the reoriented social response to alphabetical technology, to the emergence of alphabetical writing. This is also what Derrida says in On Grammatology, and he calls this the linearization of time. So there is a very strong link between time, technology, writing, and politics. But what does the transductive tell us about contemporary technologies, about today, and our sense of techno-embodiments and temporality? What is today's specificity? And this question is also the question of how to respond to another point of the Metabody program, which I find very interesting. And this is the idea that today, we've discussed it in the past days, the panopticon system of surveillance has transformed into the pan-choreographic, so a new turn of biopower. So the question would be, what is the role of information in this turn of biopower? And let me use for a moment the term information and the term software as interchangeable. I can't go now into the complexity of the relationship between software, information, and code, which Catherine Ailes, for example, has analyzed very well in her, in her book, How We Became Posthuman. But, sorry, my mother was a computer. But for a moment, let me use information and software as indicating the same thing. And what I want to argue here, and my point, is that to understand the contemporary embodiment of the meta-human, it is fundamental to engage deeply with information or software. And the study of software, not the technical study of software, but the study of software from a cultural point of view, or a philosophical point of view, has become increasingly central to media and cultural studies and the humanities in Europe, in the UK, and in the States in the past 10 years. And what I want to say here is that software needs to be thought in its transductive relation to the human. So we need to think about software in transductive relation to ourselves. So as constitutive of contemporary consciousness and our sense of time and our sense of space. So if software is technology, then it is exteriorized memory. And then we need to ask these kind of questions. What kind of temporality becomes accessible to us through software? What kind of relationship do we establish to ourselves through software? If software is exteriorized memory, what does it record? And in what way am I constituted by software as much as I produce software? And this approach to software resonates to a certain extent with some other projects that are being carried out now in Europe in the context of the technologies of attention that constitute contemporary consciousness. So, for example, the IRI project, a group of international scholars, of which I'm part, working at the Centre Pompidou in Paris, who have recently called for new digital studies, and this term, digital organology. So digital organology would be the study of the dimensions of knowledge emerging with digitalization. And it aims at questioning the very relationship between knowledge and the digital and technology. So let me go back for a moment to Stigler and say something about the particular kind of disorientation we are experiencing in society today, and why it is particularly difficult to reorient ourselves. And according to Stigler, this is because a specific phenomenon is happening, which he calls the industrialization of memory. And I think this is a point we might find useful. It might be interesting to reflect on this. So what he says is that today the economy has taken the place of politics. Memory is regarded as capital and has become subjected to the economic law of profit. So the preservation of memory is totally subordinated to economic imperatives. So deciding what is memorable, what must be selected, stored and transmitted, what becomes an event. So the economy has a say in what constitutes memory. So ultimately, it has a say in how our sense of the past and of time is constituted. So the question becomes, is politics still possible today? Is politics in the sense of the polis still possible today? What spaces for self-reflection and critique do we still have, if any? How can we access these spaces? What can we make of them? How do we think politically in the context of the industrialization of memory, in the context of the new choreography of biopower? And there is just one point I want to emphasize here, which is very significant for me. The principle of the industrialization of memory is an attempt to calculate the effect of technology in order to make a profit. Okay? So to make a profit, technology needs to be made predictable and calculable. But of course, calculating all consequences of technology will always be intrinsically impossible, precisely because of the transductive nature of technology. So the logic of technology we've seen is never fully anthropological, and it will always give rise to unforeseeable consequences. At the same time, it requires us to try and anticipate it to function. So there is a transductive dynamic, a tension. And one example is software engineering, and I'm sure anyone who have tried their hand at programming knows that software is the great unpredictable. Software always surprises you. There are always anomalies that software generates. And it requires constant readjustment and constant decisions. So I want to conclude, and I want to conclude by pointing out how to think politically today is to think with technology. And one example of this thinking politically with technology, for me, is the emergence of open source in the 90s. We all know that open source is, in open source, the development of software is distributed among many individuals who produce many overlapping versions of a software system. I'm simplifying here, but basically the stabilization of the system is not a result of a centralized management, it's something that happens to the system. It emerges in time. So people work all together, people work independently, but they rewrite the system very quickly, and at some point, you've got stable versions of the system. So Eric Raymond wrote in The Cathedral and the Bazaar that, for example, Linus Torvald, the developer of Linux, was a great revolutionary because he developed a new model of software development. But in fact, Linus was not trying to develop a more democratic way of writing software. He was only trying to find a fast and effective way of fixing software bugs. And working on this problem, he happened to notice that if he involved enough independent programmers in his project, bugs were found and repaired much quicker, and they would get a much better software. So he was actually trying to solve an engineering problem, not a political. In order to understand the specificities of the contemporary embodiment of the always already posthuman, I think we need to understand the transductive relations between the technological and the social, the technological and what we call the human, and particularly the conditions of the technicization of life in the context of industrialization. And this understanding would allow us to ask politically meaningful questions of technology, like what kind of reflexivity and critique is enabled by contemporary technology, conceived as constitutive of the always already meta-human? What kind of political or perhaps even meta-political formations are enabled by contemporary technologies that can resist or change or operate in the space between the economic imperative? How can we promote non-patrimonial forms of digital humanities, for example? How can we work with the unpredictable in technologies? These are the kinds of questions I think Metabody should also ask. Thank you.